Jenna Harper here. I am an employee of CCASA, and I'm going to talk to you today about SARTs community collaboration. It's not as snazzy, the title that I came up with for the actual title slide here, but hopefully you will find the presentation snazzy enough. Right. So a little bit about CCASA. I'm sure some of you are somewhat familiar since you got to this webinar today. We are a membership-based organization, so we have members who are sexual assault organizations as well as individuals. If you're interested in membership, go to our website, ccasa.org. It's got all sorts of great benefits, including free training, technical assistance and support, these webinars. We also do some great legislative work, so check out our website, ccasa.org. We are also on Instagram and Facebook, so follow us there. So today's webinar, I am going to try my very best to make it interactive. I've sat on enough webinars enough to know that it can sometimes get difficult to pay attention when there are all those other distractions going on around you. So I'm trying my best to engage with you through the chat box as well as through polls. So please do engage with me when I'm asking you those questions. Please do complete the polls to the best of your capacity. And do feel free to ask me questions throughout the presentation. I'm not going to hold off and wait and say, okay, 20 minutes has gone by, do you have any questions? So I'm asking you as we go through, if you have questions or if you have comments, like, oh, we do that here. I'm going to ask you to send that to the chat box, and that's going to go to Maria, and Maria's going to interrupt me and say, hey, Jenna, we have a question, so that we can talk about it, and it can be as much of a discussion as possible over a webinar. Like Maria said, you will get a copy of the PowerPoint at the end, and it will be posted to YouTube. So my name is Jenna, and I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Sexual Assault Response Program Manager. So I've been with CCASA for just a little over 2 months. So I am new to my position, and I'm also new to Colorado. So I've done a lot of learning so far, and I look forward to continuing that learning around what is going on around the state to address sexual violence, especially that collaborative multidisciplinary response, because my role is to provide training, technical assistance, and support to sexual assault response teams around the state. A little bit about my background. I have been doing a lot of training in the past decade. So I did training for law enforcement, prosecutors, sexual assault nurse examiners, advocates, SARTs, as well as tribes and universities. I was doing this work mostly in Oregon. I did the law enforcement training nationwide. So I am new to Colorado and learning about that. So please have patience with me if I'm not super up on all the legislative stuff. I've also done a lot of sexual violence prevention in the last 4 years. I was managing a sexual violence prevention program in Portland, Oregon. I'm a social worker. That is my background. I love hiking, so I'm gonna put a prize out there. I'm gonna ask folks to guess, where do you think this photo of me was taken? And here's a hint. There's 2 places that have the same name. I'm in one of those places. So if you guess it, I will get your address and I will send you a prize. Okay, so feel free to guess in the chat box if you feel like playing along. So I want to know who is on the call. So we only have a limited amount of options we could put on here. So I'm going to ask if you're an advocate. I know there can be different types of advocates. If you're law enforcement, if you're from the DA's office, prosecutor's office, medical, or other. And then I'm going to give you a chance to answer.
Cool. So it looks like folks are starting to vote, and it's shifting quite a bit. We have about 62% advocates currently, 8% prosecutor's office, 15% medical, and before it was 15% other. So we have one person that has typed in that they're a lawyer, but presumably not in a prosecutor's office. So it looks like the majority of folks have voted. I'm going to give you all just a little bit longer just to give you the opportunity to put in what it is that your role is. And then I'm going to go ahead and close it now. and share those results with you and with Jenna. So it ended up that 67% of people who are joining us today are advocates. 7% are prosecutors from a prosecutor's office, 13% are medical, and 13% are other. And so we did get that 1% share that they are a lawyer. And yeah, I'll turn it back over to you, Jenna.
All right. Well, I'm glad to have all of you here today. I like that. I love that we have multiple folks from different disciplines, because this is all about collaboration. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about what is a SART, and really what can a SART be, because I'm not going to tell you what a SART has to be. That has to be community defined. Who's on a SART? What's a SART going to do? What are the activities? Why do you bother doing all this stuff? What are the benefits of being on a SART or being part of a SART? And then how do you make sure that your SART has success and sustainability, so it has longevity? So I'm going to ask if there's anything else that you really hope that we cover together within those topics, or even outside of those topics, that you type that into the chat box. I'm not promising that I'm able to cover that today, but if there is anything specifically, let me know. Okay. So here's my first big question for you that I'm going to ask for you to critically think about. How does it help to work with others outside of your agency? How does it help you to do the job that you do as an advocate, to work with somebody, for example, who's not an advocate? Maybe they're a lawyer, maybe they are law enforcement, maybe they do mental health work or addiction work. If you are a lawyer, how does it help you to work with law enforcement or an advocate? And I'm going to give you some time to answer that.
So while folks are thinking about that, there was one question that came in. Is there a variety of types of SARTs?
Ooh, love that question. Okay, so the word SART, Sexual Assault Response Team, I feel like people think, oh, it means that we can only do SART response, like response to sexual assault, which I'm going to talk about. It's not that. CCRs is another term that people use for comprehensively addressing sexual violence within their community, not just sexual assault, not just the physical variety. So CCRs is one. Another one is MDT, which typically multidisciplinary team refers to working on cases or response when it comes to youth who experience, minors and children who experience sexual violence. DVERT, domestic violence, that is a collaborative multidisciplinary team that addresses sexual violence. So SARC is also another one. I know in Boulder County they have a SART and like a resource one. So one is for response, one is for a resource. The way I'm going to talk about a SART is just comprehensively addressing sexual violence. And you don't even have to call it a SART. It's all just about collaboration. You know, we did work once in Oregon with tribes, and we envisioned that as sexual assault response and resource circle. So really, whatever resonates with your community. All right, Maria, we got anything yet?
Yeah, we have one that just came in. There are specific areas of expertise that I do not have, and methods of approach that can bring about positive results for the people we serve. Also, working with others outside of my org helps me get a better perspective on the issues. Hold on, sorry, we can't read the rest of it. On the issues they work with. So
yes, I love that, absolutely. So
we are addressing.
Thank you. Does anyone here know everything? If you do, let's be friends. I'd love to walk around with like a living encyclopedia. But no, like we all could benefit to learn something from someone else because of the trainings, the education, the experiences that we've had both professionally and also through the identities that we hold as people. And so working with people outside of our profession, if we're advocates, if we're law enforcement, as well as working just with a variety of people who could bring diversity to it, can be so helpful.
Yeah, and then Jenna, there's a couple of others that have come in. Soft handoffs. Clients can feel more comfortable utilizing resources that they refer them to, and then a decrease in duplication of services.
Absolutely. So warm handoffs, referrals where you know each other, you're not going to be able to do everything. You have a certain scope to your position, and knowing who does what elsewhere can really be helpful in explaining that to your client or the person that you're working with, and knowing the person that you're going to hand them to so you have that relationship. Mm-hmm. Anything else, Maria? All right. Thank you for that. All right. Here's the next question. How is it challenging? So there are a lot of benefits, but we need to talk about both sides of the coin. What are some difficulties involved in working with other folks in the systems, outside of the systems, folks who do similar work or maybe work that's not so similar? How can it provide things that bring sometimes barriers and difficulties and sometimes conflict?
Jenna, someone said sometimes people have competing priorities.
Absolutely.
Different approaches, different bottom lines, lack of trust.
Yes. So historically, when we're looking at the folks coming to the table for a sexual assault response team, there can be some historical turf issues. There can be some differences in the frameworks that people work within, and different goals that folks have that sometimes can be competing. And we're going to discuss a lot of that today.
We have a couple more that are coming in. Policies and procedures are different for every agency, and then they may disagree with how they handle situations. Maybe they aren't trauma-informed or have strict guidelines.
Yes. Okay. So all of these are exact reasons why we need SARTs or why we need these multidisciplinary teams, because we have different policy and procedure, and if we don't know what each other's policies and procedures are, how do we work together in a way that is really coordinated, collaborative, and trauma-informed? And when that conflict comes up, which it inevitably will, how do we have those relationships, those existing relationships, so that we can address them in a way so we don't become defensive? So all of these reasons are actual reasons why you need to have a SART. Thank you for taking the time to answer those. Okay, so what is a SART? A SART stands for Sexual Assault Response Team. Like I said, it doesn't mean that you only have to do response. You could be doing so much more. But the crux of it is that it's multidisciplinary. So it has more than just advocates, or it's more than just the DA and law enforcement getting together. It's a group of multidisciplinary folks from around the state, around the county, around the judicial district, whatever you define the community as. And it's collaborative. It's working together to overcome some of those challenges that you just named. All right. So I want to know, are you on a SART? So, yep, I'm on a SART, could be one of your answers. Another answer could be no, because we don't have one. Or it could be no, because we have one, or but we have one, or we might have one. So the answer might be you don't know if we have a SART, or you're not on a SART, but you know you have one. And then what's a SART again? So I'll give you a minute to answer that. If you're one of the people who answered no, but we might have one, email me and I can help you to find out if you are one of those folks who has a SART that is existing, or if you're somebody who is in an area where folks who have interest in starting a SART, but they're in the process of recruitment. And I just had 2 conversations with folks from 2 different counties yesterday who are in that position. Maria, what are we seeing?
Yeah, so about 50% of y'all have voted. We have 73% of folks say yes, yep, they have one, and then 27% that say no, but we have one or might have one. And right now it's split between those 2, and still only about half of you have voted. So if you haven't voted yet, please do select the option that fits you. We did have a few other people vote, and that has shifted a little bit to 57% say they have one, 7% say they don't, and 36% say no, but they have one or might have one. So I'm going to go ahead and close that poll and share it with you all. Not everyone voted, but of the ones who voted, we have 53% who have one and are part of it, 7% who don't have one, 40% that they have one or might have one, but they aren't part of it.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much, Maria. So it's great to see that 57, did you say percent? 53. Thank you. 53% of folks, about half of folks do know that they have a SART. You know, moving here to Colorado and seeing how many places actually have an established SART and how many of those SARTs have coordinators makes me so excited, and it really shows how progressive Colorado is around addressing sexual violence in a collaborative way. All right, so let's talk about who can be on a SART. And you might be thinking, I already know this. Do we really need to ask this question? We're actually going to spend a bit of time on this because I think that we can expand our view. So I want you to forget that question, who can be on a SART, and I want you to answer this question for me. Who do you interact with in your job? So I think about like an average week. Who are the folks outside of your agency that you work with in a professional capacity? So it might be through, like you said, warm referrals. It might be through meetings of some sort. We getting any answers yet, Maria?
Not yet. I think folks are still thinking about it or typing. So we did have a couple folks, as I said that. So ER, law enforcement, advocates, school administrators, law enforcement. There was another one for that. Keep them coming, folks.
Yeah. And I want you to really think like outside of that box that you like about the folks that you deal with like on a super regular basis. Who are the folks that you have to give warm referrals to? If you were to be providing wraparound services to your survivor, who are the folks that you always interact? Not always. I'm going to take that back. That you interact with that would be helpful for your survivor. And also think about like who are folks that you would like to be able to refer them to, but those resources don't exist or you don't know if they exist.
Cool. So more folks have said the DA office, community resources, judges, mental health agencies, Planned Parenthood, counselors, budget center, Love Inc., hospital, counselors, township trustees, housing resources, food assistants, other attorneys, and then there were some that were duplicates in there as well. So counselors came up a few times, housing came up a couple times.
Great. Yeah, that's a lot of people, right? All right, so then when we look at who's on a SART, most of us just think of these 4 folks. And you did list these: medical folks, advocacy, law enforcement, your DA's office, or your prosecutors. So if those are folks that you're interacting with, why is it that these are the main folks that we're looking at for your SART? We're going to break it down who you could also invite and why it might be pertinent to have them on there.
Someone added rehab centers.
Yes. Yeah. So how do people deal with trauma when they're not getting support, or even when they are getting support? Through self-medication, which often comes in the form of addiction, right? So it's very common that we're going to be working with survivors who experience addiction. And so having addiction folks on your SART can be helpful. And that's not even on my list. So look at that. Y'all are really bringing up some awesome stuff. So I think really being inclusive of your collaboration is something that's important, and really avoiding being insular with your SART. So these dogs have a mission, right? They're going somewhere with this stick. But there's 3 main folks, one who's on there but kind of fallen off. So when I saw this, I kind of thought of a SART, because oftentimes you've got your 4 main disciplines, but not all of them are always represented, their voices equally. And then oftentimes there's some folks who are trying to say, hey, I have a voice in this too, or I want to be a part of this, but they're falling off. So I want us to talk about how we could be a little bit more inclusive of everybody within our community who might be addressing sexual violence in some way. Another thing I want to say is I talk really fast. If the pace that we're going at isn't working for you, if it doesn't feel accessible, please type to Maria, Jenna, slow down. Okay. So sometimes you have core members. So those are the folks who would be expected to attend every meeting to their capacity. And then you might have guest members, folks who come for certain meetings to discuss issues. Those guests might then become core members, or they might just be guests and kind of trying it out and helping to inform you about resources, for example, that are in the community. Sometimes these guests might be trainers to help you to learn more about maybe specific populations, or perhaps something around trauma, for example. So let's start with medical. Of course, you'll have your SANE if you have a SANE in your community or a neighboring community. They may also go by SAE, FNE, forensic nurse examiner, sexual assault examiner. Having a hospital administrator on your SART, if it's possible, can be helpful, because you need to get buy-in from the emergency room if you're going to be doing exams in your emergency room. Let's say you're doing your exams at your public health clinic, or maybe even at Planned Parenthood even. Survivors are going to show up at the hospital. How are they going to be triaged? What is the protocol and process in place if you're going to then send them to the place, and how do you make sure that folks know it? Having your administrators and the charge nurse, who is the person who's going to be in charge in the emergency department, know all of the policy and procedures is going to be helpful when you're talking about response to sexual assault. Other folks who are going to interact with survivors, understanding what it means to be trauma informed when it specifically comes to sexual violence, and understanding policy and procedure, how to call out an advocate, how to call out a SANE, what is the time in which someone will respond. So having clinic personnel, having front desk folks informed on that and trained on that on a regular basis whenever there's turnover, whenever there's change, important stuff. Doesn't mean that they have to come to every meeting by any means, but it means that they need to be included in the scope of the SART work. Also clinic personnel, especially if you're going to be doing any exams at public health clinics or other clinics, and then other emergency department, emergency room staff like doctors and nurses who will be interacting with the survivors and with the SANEs or involved in the triage and transfer process. And let me know if as we go along there's anyone from medical or from the other disciplines that I don't have listed that you think is really important to mention. So law enforcement. Law enforcement includes detectives, patrol, also dispatch, because where are you sending the survivor to get the exam? Where is the SANE available? Is going to be important information so that the survivor is not having to hop around from place to place before knowing where they could get an exam. And sometimes that changes. So getting the folks updated information on the protocol and on where the resource is available. Your sheriff's office, especially because oftentimes they're the folks who are working with the jails. Sometimes state police might be pertinent to you. And if you're working with a tribal reservation anywhere close to you, having FBI and tribal folks come to your SART.
Someone mentioned, Jenna, about the medical slide about EMS, like ambulance, etc.
Oh yeah. Thank you for mentioning that. Absolutely. Yeah, let me know if there's anyone I'm missing from law enforcement too. When it comes to advocacy, having your community-based advocates on your SART, and within community-based advocacy, there can also be culturally specific advocates. That's often true more so in the metro areas. And there can be sometimes dual domestic violence sexual assault agencies or standalone sexual assault agencies. 51% of women who are raped by their intimate partner. So there's a huge overlap between intimate partner violence, domestic violence, and sexual assault. So sometimes having your domestic violence agency attend, even if you have a sexual assault specific, can be helpful, especially if you're going to be doing case review where there's going to be overlap. And then, of course, there's system-based advocates out of your law enforcement agency, out of your DA's office, wherever that might be. And then in your DA's office, if you're in a smaller community, your actual elected DA might be there, your deputy district attorney, your DDA, your ADA, your assistant district attorney, and then any advocates from your DA's office. And then there's other folks within the social service realm, like counselors or mental health, especially if you're working in a smaller community and your advocacy agency has less capacity. Having your mental health and your counselor folks be there can be really important to provide more support for that. And there's going to be oftentimes overlap, with the survivors that you're working with, the needs that they have. So having DHS, having housing folks on there, adult protective services, child protective services. Again, this might overlap with your MDT because folks might be minors, but humans have a lot of different needs. And so they'll be interacting with other services. So Title IX is something that was handed down that includes sexual harassment, so sexual assault fits under that umbrella. Title IX is both for higher education, institutions of higher ed, as well as K through 12. I think a lot of us think about it more so for colleges and universities because they have a lot more programming that's a lot more robust. But folks in both university, colleges, and elementary, middle, and high school are experiencing sexual violence. And they don't necessarily work within a system that's trauma informed, that has protocol, and that really knows how to interact with other folks within the system. So a lot of you, I think, are already working with universities and colleges. And a lot of you who are on SARTs are working, or whether you're on a SART or not, you have contacts within K through 12 schools. That might be a counselor, it might be administrator. If it's an administrator, awesome. Get them to your meeting. Ask them how they're addressing sexual violence. And talk about how you can be better working together to provide services to those folks who are experiencing sexual violence, and how you could be working with them to do preventative programming to prevent sexual violence in your community. And then cultural and population-specific organizations and agencies. You're going to be working with folks, or you're not working with folks who are marginalized, who have specific needs, who are not accessing your services, and doing outreach to them, building awareness about your services, building capacity so you can better serve them, so that you are going to make yourself accessible and culturally responsive to them. The way that you can do that is by building relationships with the organizations who are representative of those populations.
We have one for, which might be on the slide. Someone typed in probation for law enforcement.
Absolutely. Yeah, I got that as who else, but I think it does fit under law enforcement too. So Department of Corrections. So that's, when I'm talking about DOC or Department of Corrections, that's specifically speaking to prisons rather than jails. So I just had a conversation with Ronnie Ortiz, and he's the one who manages PREA, which stands for Prison Rape Elimination Act. And that addresses sexual violence that happens, or sexual assault specifically, that happens behind bars when someone is incarcerated. It's not just for prisons, it's for jail, it's for community corrections, it's for ICE detention centers, it's for youth centers. If you want to find out more about PREA, we have lots of webinars on our YouTube channel. We're also coming out with an online module soon. Having somebody from your jail who addresses PREA, your prison, your community corrections who addresses PREA is great. After talking to Ronnie, he said anyone who's on a SART or who wants to get involved with their local facility, I will put you in contact with Ronnie so that you can get in contact with a facility-specific person. Because sexual assault is absolutely happening to people who are incarcerated, and they absolutely deserve support. Parole and probation. So part of addressing sexual violence comprehensively and collaboratively is including how we deal with people who have committed acts of sexual violence. So that would include parole and probation and sex offender management. Working as an advocate for the last 15 years, there wasn't a lot of interaction between the work that I did and folks who did offender treatment until later in my career. And I think that it is really important for us to understand, because people who commit acts of sexual violence are still existing in our communities, and the ways that we can reduce recidivism or reoffending is something that your SART can address. Having military, if there's a military installation in your community, so for example, I am sitting here with Maria in Colorado Springs. There's a lot of military here, so involving them in how they're addressing sexual violence and where the overlap happens is important. And then neighboring SART coordinators. I wrote an email, some of you might be on the webinar right now, to 3 different folks who all of their borders were touching each other from different counties, and they could be working together to be addressing sexual violence in their communities. What is their community doing? Just because we draw this arbitrary line to say one county is different than another, it doesn't affect where somebody's actually being sexually assaulted, and then where they report, where they access services, and where they live. All of that can be all jumbled up. So working together is going to be important across all of our geographic boundaries. That goes for tribes as well, and working across, if you're on the boundary with Kansas or New Mexico, or what's to the west? Utah? Geography is a challenge.
Especially for transplants.
Yes, especially for transplants. Who else? So having a representative SART, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, is important, but a challenge. And so having folks who represent their community and know their community intimately be part of your SART, also a good idea. That could be faith leaders, culturally specific leaders, tribal leaders in their community. Not only can they help to inform you about what it means to work with specific populations, but they could then take information back to build outreach and awareness to their communities, help build programs and be informed what it means to build programs around response as well as prevention. You might consider also having a survivor slot on your SART. if you've got a group of people in a room, chances are someone's a survivor, right? Especially if they're involved in this work. However, having that professional speak from their experience can sometimes cross that professional boundaries for them. And so having a survivor who's interested in saying, hey, here's my experience, here's what I would like to see, is something that sometimes some SARTs choose to do.
Someone also added self-defense instructors to that list.
Yeah, so when it comes to empowerment to your community, sometimes self-defense can feel empowering. So whenever you're thinking about membership, really, whenever you're thinking about anything that you do, I want you to ask yourself, how are you accountable to your community? And there's multiple ways that we can define community. The community can be your professional community, and that's one of them. But your community is also the folks who live within the geographic area that you define that you're going to cover. And I want you to really think about who's in that community and who is not being represented, whose voice is not there. And then I want you to think, how can your membership really reflect everybody who's there, including the voices who you don't think are being represented. So how does your SART reflect the diversity within your community? Is there representation there? And if there's not, why not? Think about accessibility. Who's not at the table? Why is it that people are not at the table? Have they not gotten an invitation? If that invitation was given, is it not accessible in some way in terms of where you're hosting your meetings? Certain groups of color or people of color don't find police agencies or police stations, places that feel safe or comfortable to them. So that might be a reason. It could be that the geographic location isn't accessible to them. It could be that it is not ADA accessible, meaning that someone who is, for example, in a wheelchair could actually get into the building. So I really want you to think about language accessibility, all the things that could be barriers for people to show up to your meeting. And I know that these are things that you think about when you're offering services to folks. I also want you to think about that for folks that you're trying to get to your SART meeting as well. So how do you get folks to the table? Not always easy. When you're recruiting members, folks who maybe haven't been coming or folks that used to come and don't come anymore, folks that would be like, wait, what is this? Let them know that you're there because you think their voice matters, that you want to hear from them. Use existing networks and connections that you might have or other folks within the SART or within your agency might have, and explain what a SART is. So go beyond sending an email and saying, hey, would you like to come to our SART? Okay, I know that people don't do this a lot anymore, but picking up the phone and having a phone call can go a long way. Or even trying to meet with someone in person, meet with them for coffee and say, hey, I'd love to hear more about what you do, and I would love to explain to you what we do as this collaborative team that exists or that is in formation. And that moves us to building relationships. I do think that the crux of a SART is all about relationships. It's the foundation. It's what keeps you moving forward. It's what allows you to overcome the barriers and the conflict. It's overcoming differences to work towards a common goal, just like this wonderful cat and dog. Okay, so I want to ask you, based on your previous question, you are collaborating. How does it go for you? Either super awesome, we're like a family, or it works pretty well. So maybe it depends on the day, maybe it depends on the person, the agency, or ugh, it's rough, or I can't even begin to tell you about it. It's so bad. So I know that this can very much vary depending on the personnel, the agency, but try your best to generalize when you're doing collaboration in your community, and feel free if you want to qualify that with anything specific. You could put your answer in the poll, and then you could also talk about it in the chat box.
Great, so we're nearing about 50% of folks who have responded. We have quite a variety here. 9%, or that just moved to 8% of folks said that it's super awesome, that they're like family. 38% say it works pretty well. 31% say so-so, it depends. 15% say, ugh, it's rough. So it's still shifting a little bit as more people vote. We have about 60% of folks who have voted. So I'm just going to leave it open for a little while longer as you kind of think about what those relationships are like, what that collaboration is like for you all in your areas. And then I won't leave it open for too long, but if you haven't voted, please do answer the poll. Again, we have these shifts. So now 13% say it's super awesome, 40% say it works pretty well. So more than half of y'all say that it's going well. And then we have about 46% that say that it's a little so-so or it's rough. So I don't see more responses coming in. So I'm going to go ahead and close that poll, and I'm going to share it with you all. And it didn't shift from the last time that I said what it was at. So it's 13% super awesome, 40% it works pretty well, 33% say so-so, it depends, and 13% say that it's rough.
Okay. Well, it's great to hear that more than half of you, if my math is correct, are on the positive end of side, think that it goes pretty well. And no one even said I can't even.
No. One person did type in that they feel like the nonprofits in their area disagree with each other on how to help or handle the community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think for folks who are in disagreement, as well as folks who are working well together, it's still important to get together and do this, right? Because even if your relationships are great right now, one of the biggest barriers to doing this work, it's got a high burnout rate, you know? And so turnover does happen, and maintaining those relationships on a regular basis is still important. So your foundation to doing SART work is really building relationships. And I think breaking bread is an important part of that. I love food. A lot of people agree with me. Meetings can get redundant and tiring. And so I think, honestly, if I know that there's going to be food at a meeting, I'm going to be about 35% more excited to go to that meeting. Those might change for people who are less exuberant about food than me, but food does bring people to the table, and it does bring people together. It brings a sense of casualness, I think, to a meeting that can break down barriers when you watch someone shoving a bagel in their face. Okay, check your ego at the door. All right, these next two, I think, are some of the most challenging parts of working on a SART. So I'm going to spend a few minutes on it. I want you to think to yourself, how many of you go into a collaborative meeting thinking, I do this right and they do this wrong? And I'm going to throw myself under the bus that I sometimes do that. And I need to be checking my ego, because if I walk into a room like that, then it's not going to be, we're not starting off on the right foot. We are starting off in a place where I am already going to be defending my stance because I think I'm right and you're wrong, and I'm not being open-minded. So checking your ego at the door and staying open-minded to other people's frameworks, perspectives. It doesn't mean that you're necessarily doing things wrong. It's just that maybe you're considering that other people aren't doing things necessarily wrong either, or you're going to come with an understanding of where that person is coming from more. I also really want you to think about the power that different players are bringing to this group. Power comes in different forms. Inevitably, you have those power dynamics. It's unavoidable. It comes with our bodies. So power can have to do with the identities that we bring to the table. Those identities could be gender. It could have to do with race. It could be things that are visible and things that are invisible, things like different disabilities. It can also come with positions of power within the community. So, for example, a district attorney can make the decision whether or not to prosecute a case. So they come with some innate power differential than some other folks at the table. Some folks are in their community are given more respect and credibility based on different things. So I want you to think about that when you walk into the room. What is it that you're bringing, and how can you be aware of that power and work to then to the best of your ability, try and level that power, because everybody who's at that table deserves an equal voice in the way things happen. So building relationships starts with just chatting about why you're here. And I know that this might feel a little 101 or like, oh, we're past that. We've been doing a SART, because there was like a good percent of you said that you're on a SART. I think that this is a good thing to revisit on a regular basis. Why are you here? And I'm talking about you as an individual. And people might talk about different things, and I wouldn't necessarily police that. Some people might say I'm here, and it might have something to do with something that's personal. It might have something to do with the passion that they hold for their work. It might have something to do with their supervisor told them it was part of their role and they had to come. People might have a variety of answers. There's no wrong answer to that. But it's going to help you to understand where someone's coming from, and that's going to help you when conflict comes up. And that's going to lead to why are we here as a group, which will help then for you to define your SART and what you're going to do and what you stand for. The first part after is like why you, like when you're eating your bagels and you're talking about why you're here, that's great. Like maybe that's your first meeting, or that's like your first like reunion or like your retreat type thing. Then I really think it's important to understand each other's roles before you dive into what you're doing, right? So the cat supplies the socks. I have a cat. She's very guilty of this. She likes to go in the sock drawer and pull them out. That's her role. I don't have a dog yet, but they're coming. The dog then eats the socks. Everyone knows their roles. It's important to talk about what is it that you do and what is your lane, what are other people's lanes, when do they intersect, and what are your limitations within those lanes. I know a lot of people kind of skip over this step and they just start doing the work, especially let's say that there's a domestic violence team, an MDT team. That was redundant. But groups where they already know each other, especially if you're in a small community. You're like, we already know each other, let's skip over this. I would really encourage you to stop and to take a breath and to really talk about what it means to do your job. And I was just talking to Hannah, who I think is on here, yesterday about this, that there's fun activities that you could do to talk about what is your role and what do you do. What is a day in the life of your job? Because oftentimes we really don't know that about each other. So as an advocate, what does it mean for you to have confidentiality? What is your confidentiality limitation? As a SANE, what is yours? So we've got VAWA, we've got HIPAA, and that's going to be different for law enforcement and your DA, right? And that's going to be different for folks who work in addiction, folks who work for DHS. So folks really coming to the table and getting that out in like the very first time that you meet. Or if it's not, if you're already past that, going back to that and revisiting it. So here's one of the examples why I think it's so important. An advocate, a community-based advocate's role is to support a survivor in the way that they want to be supported. So it has nothing to do with what an advocate wants to see or thinks is best for them. It's having a survivor come to them and say, what is it that you need support around? How is it that I can support you? That might be reported to law enforcement. And then the advocate can get a release of information, which has to be time limited. Usually a month is what VAWA requires. VAWA stands for Violence Against Women Act, and it's the funding stream that most advocates get. And it has confidentiality requirements. So if they're going to talk to anyone outside of their agency about working with the survivor, even naming who that person is, they need a time limited, again, a month is recommended, release of information, saying exactly the information that they're going to talk to that person about, and they need to really fully talk about the risks of what that might be with the survivor. That is something that is handed down from the federal government to advocates. So that is something that advocates must abide by. It is both the scope of their role, it is also the legal requirement for, well, the requirement for their funding. If they were to, let's say, talk to law enforcement about an investigation that was open with one of the people that they were working with without a release of information, what that would do is breach VAWA, which could put their funding at risk. And what is that communicating to the rest of survivors within their community? That they might go talk to other people within the community about what happened to them, which will mean survivors will stop reaching out to advocates. that they will not be getting their services, that they will not be reporting probably because they're not getting support, and that their trauma will remain and that their offender will remain out there. So having everybody who's involved in the system understand each other's roles, their restrictions, and why those are in place, the limitations that they have, is an important part, because I have absolutely seen law enforcement officers who haven't understood why the advocate can't help them to give them, they know that an advocate has information about their case that could affect it. Why won't they tell them about it? And so getting this out in the very beginning and then like revisiting that is going to be helpful when that comes up. And then also talking about driving principles and frameworks. What is it that you know really drives you in your work? What is the thing that you're thinking about? Whether that's an anti-oppression framework and what that means, without just saying, I work in an anti-oppression framework. What does that mean to you? When you say working in a trauma-informed framework, what does that mean to you? How does that actually look? So another great thing to do when you're kind of in the beginning stages, even if you're not in the beginning stages, this can happen whenever, is to do resource mapping. What exists in your community? And expanding your view. And I heard a lot of great things in your initial response. Okay, so the photo that you're seeing right now on the PowerPoint, my friend is an adjunct professor in the School of Social Work. And when I was on my way from Florida here, when I was coming here for my job, and she is in Georgia. So I stopped to visit her and to get some things there. And she was teaching a class, and she said, do you want to come in and be a guest presenter? We're doing community resource mapping. I said, yes. So I went to the class and I said, hey, this is what a sexual assault response team is. I'm going to ask you to think about your community and do community resource mapping. And it was so cool. Like, only one of the people in the class had ever heard of anything like a SART. And they came up with so many amazing resources that were outside of the box of what I even ever thought of that could somehow be part of a SART. So some of the things that they came up with were like the opera house, because they could be providing funding and building awareness, or like the movie theater, because they could be putting up ads in the beginning before movies. Really thinking outside of the box, who could come for guests. Having somebody from the utility company is something that someone came up with, because sometimes survivors might be needing utility assistance. So I really want you to do this and not think of the confines of sexual assault when you're doing resource mapping. What resources exist within your community? And this might be really overwhelming if you are, for example, like in Denver or Broomfield. If you're in a smaller community, it might be less work. But then I want you to think of agencies that work statewide. For example, CCASA or Rocky Mountain Victim Law Center. Folks that do work outside of your specific community but might still be able to provide training, technical assistance, or support. And then I want you to think about, okay, out of all these amazing resources that we put out here, what of these resources can we share? And I think that's one way that someone listed earlier, that we can come together and that is actually beneficial for collaboration. So having interpreters is not an easy thing to find in a small community. How can you share those resources? That can both be time efficient, it can be monetarily efficient, and it can also just be helpful to know who has what where. Even sharing like electronic equipment if that's possible. You're also going to find out what's lacking. So you might find that you don't have services for folks who are experiencing addiction. You might find that you don't have interpretive services. You might find that you don't have a specific LGBTQ population-specific group within your community to help support those folks who are experiencing sexual violence and identify as LGBTQ. And that can help to define, okay, well, where do we need to work in this community? What is missing? What are our gaps? So within your members, I think to have efficient, productive meetings, it can be helpful to have member roles. Most people are familiar with the terminology or the role of a SART coordinator, and that person is typically the person who is writing emails to say, hey, this is where it is when they're organizing for the facility. Oftentimes, the coordinator and the facilitator are the same person, but they do not have to be. So a facilitator is the person who's going to be managing the meeting. And I think that there are some skills that can be challenging as a facilitator. if you're really doing the work, conflict will come up. It actually should. It doesn't mean it has to be angry conflict, but it means that you're going to be butting heads in some way. And a facilitator needs to be somebody who can manage those sorts of conflict in a way that is healthy and modeling healthy communication and behavior. And they also need to be somebody who is, like when I was talking about power, thinking about how are we making sure that everybody has a voice at this table. Is there anyone here who has tried to facilitate and take notes at the same time? I have, and it's really hard. So just logistically, having someone else take notes while someone else is facilitating, going to be helpful. So you've got your coordinator, your facilitator, your note taker, and your bread baker, because if you're going to be breaking bread, you need to have someone who is going to bake it. They don't need to be part of your SART. Maybe they can donate it because they're really nice. Oh my gosh, this is so much information. You've been listening to me and Maria talk, mostly me, for 52 minutes now. That's a long time. So I want you to guess what type of bear this is. Does anyone know?
And while people are typing in, we only got one person to guess where you were at the beginning. So if you have any thoughts about that, you can also type that in while you're kind of processing information. Someone guessed that it was Washington. So if you have other guesses, type that in. Someone said Mummy Range.
Ooh, I want to know where Mummy Range is because I've never heard of it.
Mm-hmm.
But person who said Washington, I'm going to say you're warm. But you got to go in the direction that's actually not as warm to guess it.
And how specific do you want this, Jenna?
I want it pretty done. You don't have to give me the actual trail that I was on, but it is a designated area. And here's the main clue. It is not Washington, but it is by Washington. And it is, there's two places named this. It's probably not the one that you would automatically think of. This is really hard. I don't expect anyone to get it, but if you do, you're getting a prize in the mail.
And then also don't forget that you're guessing what type of animal this is. And then folks, the person who said Andrea said the Mummy Range is in Rocky Mountain National Park, and it is beautiful.
Oh, I can't wait to go to Rocky Mountain National Park. I got here in the winter. I can still do it. I'm probably gonna have to snowshoe it, I guess. I'll bear the cold.
Someone guessed Portland.
Oh, no, okay, so I did just move from Portland. However, Portland has like one mountain in the distance that's like 45 minutes away, and then like singular mountains everywhere else. Not a wonderful range like this. Not to diss Portland. I do love Portland.
No other guesses? No guesses about the animal.
Okay, so we actually had to reverse Google image search what this animal was. It kind of looks.
Someone guessed brown bear.
So it is a bear, but it is not of the brown variety. This thing.
Bear, black bear, Asian black bear.
Nope. Think about, it's not the moon, it's the
sun bear.
Round of applause. It's a sun bear.
Or Andrea. I'm sorry, I don't know how to say your name correctly. Someone did guess Saddle Mountain Trail, Oregon.
Saddle Mountain is pretty, and you can see a lot of mountains from Saddle Mountain, but not there either. I'm going to ask you to move north from Washington. That's going to be another clue.
Okay, but keep guessing. Keep those guesses coming in. And then I know Jenna still has a bit of information to share with you. So think about it, and like I said, type those in, and we will get back to that.
All right. Let's move on to defining your SART. Who are you? Okay, so there's quite a few ways that we can go about talking about this and that you can do it. What is your vision for a number of ways? We're talking about response first, but it doesn't mean that that's what you have to do first, right? Your SART can do lots of things to address sexual violence comprehensively. Notice I use the word sexual violence rather than sexual assault because it encompasses other forms of sexual violence. For example, non-consensual sexual image sharing is absolutely a traumatic thing that someone can experience that doesn't have to do with touching. When I say comprehensively address, I'm also talking about outreach, awareness, and prevention. So we'll get to that too. But I want you to talk about like pie in the sky. Once you get your folks at a table, if you had all of the resources available, what would you want your response to look like? And then I want you to think pie in the sky. What type of prevention programming would you have in your community if you could have any resources available to you? And what do you want to accomplish? So those are some guiding questions to help to guide your SART in this discussion. And I want you to think, how is the community's voice represented? Larger than the community of your SART. So I want you to think about the folks who are not at your table. What do they want to see happen in your community? And there can be lots of ways that you can go about doing this. Community needs assessment, community readiness assessment, we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But I really do think it's important that you think that when you're doing these things, you're always thinking about the larger community. So I really encourage folks to come together and talk about what it means to be trauma-informed and victim-centered. I am not going to tell your SART who it should be, what it should do, or what a SART is, right? Except here are the two things that I really do think that a SART needs to be. It needs to be informed by what trauma is. Trauma-informed is a huge definition. So when I do SART workshops in person, what I do is I talk, like this can be like a 2-hour training and workshop combined where you talk about this is what trauma is. What does it look like for you as law enforcement in your everyday job to be trauma-informed? What are some of the things that you could choose to do? Where are the choices that you could give survivors within the restrictions of the criminal justice system? Same goes for prosecutors. Same goes for advocates, SANEs, anyone else, people who are working in addictions, people who are working in a prison. What does that mean to be trauma-informed for you? And I really encourage you to go around the table after you really talk about what is trauma, not just trauma of sexual violence, but historical trauma. The trauma that people have experienced because of their identities, right? So in the US, like Native people who have experienced historical trauma, a genocide, cultural genocide, physical genocide, policies against their bodies, all of those elements have created historical trauma. And that trauma is handed down, and we also see generational trauma from folks who experience sexual violence within the Native community as well. So generational trauma, historical trauma, as well as the trauma of specific experiences. Really talk about that and then talk about what that means and how you're handling that within your SART. How can you use this definition then, moving forward, to understand what best practice is? So when you're, let's say you decide you're going to do case review, and you are debating whether or not you should do this as a best practice, or a specific like thing comes up in a specific case, and you're like, well, is this right? Is this wrong? Go back to your definition of what it means to be trauma-informed. Is this really based on what our understanding of trauma is? Is this going to cause this person more trauma? And I think that that really goes along and ties into what it means to be victim-centered and survivor-centered. If your SART needs to be anything, it has to be survivor-victim-centered. It needs to know that if you are not working with survivors and understanding what their trauma is and giving them as much options within the restrictions that are out there within the systems we work in, then they're not going to be accessing services, and they're not going to be reporting. Then your community is not going to be addressing sexual violence, and people are going to continue to perpetrate. So I really do think that one of the activities that you can do is talk about what is trauma first. Get like there's plenty of webinars that you could get on this. Email me for them. There's so many resources I'm going to give you. And then talk about what it means to be victim-centered and trauma-informed in all of your roles. Write it down and keep it so that you can revisit it. All right, a lot of people think that this is boring when you talk about like, write a mission statement, write a purpose statement. And they're like, we're going to write it down, it's going to be on a piece of paper, and we're never going to think about it again. If that is true, don't do it. If you're going to do something and then never like visit it again, don't do it. But a mission statement can be helpful because it helps, it's not just the product, it's the process of what do we want to do and how do we want to do it. It's defining the framework that you as a SART are going to like look at. It's your lens. It's what's guiding you to do things. So it's going to help because you're going to define yourself through that, and it's going to help then guide you in all the rest of the work that you do. But turnover does happen, And having a mission statement to communicate to a new person who's coming on board will help them to understand what they're getting into. It also helps to tell your community what you're up to and what you're doing. And who are you always accountable to, Maria?
Your community.
Yes. So you can also have purpose statements in that. If you're looking for examples of these, I got them. I asked for some people from around this state to send them to me. I also have some from nationwide as well. So email me if you ever want to see examples, because sometimes it's helpful to work off of how other people have done it. Talking about language is important. So you've heard me use the word person who've experienced sexual violence. You've heard me use the term people who've committed acts of sexual violence, perpetrator, offender. You've heard me say the word survivor and victim. I use all of these interchangeably. Here's my spiel on language. It is imperfect. There are so many people in this world who've experienced sexual violence, and some people feel empowered and say I'm a survivor, and some people are like, that person hurt me and I'm a victim, and some people are like, none of those words fit for me. So I don't think that there's one right word. And I think that the same thing goes for people who commit acts of sexual violence, perpetrators, offenders, whatever words you use. Keep in mind that there are different words that professions will typically use. So typically advocacy will use survivor, medical will use patient, and then the criminal justice system will use victim. I would say come to the table with an open mind and discuss it. Some people use victim survivor kind of interchangeably, and I've seen both of them written within documents, kind of victim/survivor. But talking about that ahead of time can sometimes get stuff out in the open. And then talk about your leading frameworks, trauma-informed, victim-centered. Those are the ones that I'm presenting to you, but I'm sure you will have other ones as well. Okay, so steps for planning. Some of the things that you'll need to do is decide if you're going to be discussing response, what are the ages for which that you're going to be discussing? If you have an MD team, your community, multidisciplinary team, what cases are they addressing and what are you addressing? So most often what I've seen here is 18 and under. Most of what I saw back in Oregon was 15 and older who can consent for exams. You'll also need to discuss your jurisdiction. So here some of them are countywide, while others are entire judicial districts, while some are 2 or 3 counties. So it depends. And sometimes like there's one coordinator for multiple. You know, you're going to define that, which is why you should be hooking up with the folks around you who are also doing SART work. If you want to know if there's a SART in your neighboring county or judicial district, email me. I haven't fully mapped out the state, but I am working on it. So some ways to codify or solidify your SART is a MOU or a Memorandum of Understanding. I do have examples of this, email me. This can say anything you want it to say. It could say we're meeting monthly and we're going to show up, and that it could just be that. And it could say everybody who's a part of it, or we're meeting quarterly, however you meet. It could say we're doing this and here are the commitments we make to show up, to help work on protocol, to do training, whatever it is that you hope to do. And you can add this on as you go along in your SART. The reason that MOUs can be helpful is because turnover happens, like it keeps saying, and it communicates that there's a commitment by that agency. So like an employee, let's say that someone's boss turned over and that boss is like, well, why are you going to this meeting? And they can say, well, we have an agency have committed to this. So, you know, it's nothing super firm, but it is something that is like you're not legally bound to do anything, but it is saying that we have buy-in, we're committed to this. If you're ever going to be talking about cases, confidentiality agreements are very important. I just sent one out yesterday. There's plenty that are available and out there I could send to you. But I think when you're talking about cases, it's super important that we don't take that lightly. Then you can create specific policies for your SART. How are you going to make decisions? If you're voting to accept a best practice, or what big task you're going to work on next. Are you going to do quorum? Are you going to do majority rule? What happens if people are missing? So talking about that ahead of time before it comes time for decision, you know, just something that you could do and put in your MOU or in your protocol, or whatever you want to put in. I also think that having agendas is a great way to keep you on track. You know, different cultures work in different ways, and I think that it's important that your community culture is incorporated in the way that you run this. So always take everything that I say with you have your own culture in your community. I think agendas can help so that everybody knows what you're going to talk about, but also has a voice in getting something on the agenda. And then, of course, there's logistics. So we already talked a lot about who you might invite. What you're going to do at your meetings is going to come next. I'm going to talk about that. But the when and the where is also important. So when do we meet? Here's what I encourage you to do. Meet outside of a time that you're doing DVERT or your domestic violence team, or outside of a time that you're doing your MDT. What happens with both domestic violence and child sexual abuse is it tends to overshadow sexual assault. There is much more of a stigma for adults who experience sexual violence. And so you might be able to do it afterward or before, but I would say make sure that you really hold a time that is specific to addressing sexual violence for adults and adolescents, or just adults, however you're defining it, in your community. Where you do it, totally up to you. Different SARTs do this in different ways. There's some places that do it the same place every month and it's just easy. There's some places, quite a few actually do rotate. And it's rotating because it makes it feel a little bit more equitable for agencies. Geographically, sometimes people have to travel far, and so they don't always want to have to travel really far. They sometimes want to be close to them. There is one SART where I talked to somebody and the coordinator told me that they meet at a community meeting room that none of them work at. And that was the fairest way to do it. And that might be a way that makes it accessible. When you're thinking about where, always think about accessibility. All right, so meeting logistics, it can help to have your agenda, also taking minutes and notes. And it might sound like a little tiny detail, but if you're gonna hold yourself accountable to actually doing something, beyond relationship building, and I don't want to minimize that, even if you're just getting into a room, you are doing something because you're building relationships. Keeping minutes or notes on what you've talked about in the meeting, of course, keep in mind confidentiality is always important, so you don't want any identifying information about anyone ever who's a client or a survivor. But it's going to let you know to remind you what was happening last time. What was I supposed to do for the last SART meeting? Oh no, I forgot. Look to the minutes and look to the notes. Another thing to keep in mind because of the Freedom of Information Act, your minutes or your notes, your public meeting, it might be available to the public. So always, always, always confidentiality. And you shouldn't be talking about something that could go in the notes that the public could find out that you don't want them to know yet. Okay, so now a little bit more concrete planning stuff. I really do think that it is helpful to do strategic planning as a SART. I think SARTs kind of fall in, like it's hard, especially if you don't have a paid full-time coordinator. It's hard to put a lot of effort forth. I always want to recognize that. And so what I see with SARTs is that oftentimes they come together and they're like, okay, well, let's just do this. And then they do that. And they're not thinking long-term, short-term, really what can we accomplish? What do we want to accomplish? And then holding themselves accountability and collecting information on that. I do want to acknowledge that this isn't always going to be within your capacity as a SART if you don't have somebody who's a coordinator of it. But I'm going to talk you through because I think it is something that you can accomplish. And I think that you can create goals, objectives, and benchmarks, even if there's something that's very small, right? So your goal is that you have a SART, which is like very broad. It's very attainable. Well, not always, but it is attainable in many communities. And then your objective is something that is concrete. It's something that you're going to do. It is the task to accomplish the goal. So your objective is to host SART meetings within your community, and you might name your community. And then your short term would be like host them now and forever. Your benchmark is how you're going to measure your success. So your benchmark is we will meet maybe, let's say, 4 times a year, right? So you can do this on a very small scale. So some examples to how you might be able to do this. Your goal is going to be really broad. Your goal is to improve response to sexual assault. How are you going to do that? That's a really, really huge thing to undertake. Well, one of the objectives, one of the tasks to work towards that you can accomplish is training. Your training could specifically be on marginalized populations, maybe that you're not reaching, that are harder to reach, and trauma-informed practices. Another objective is doing case review, because that can improve your sexual assault response. How are you going to measure those? Really, really, really encourage you to hold yourself accountable by measuring things. Anyone who's ever done grant writing or worked with grants, you've had to do this. You've had to measure what you're doing. So we will train quarterly. How often? Within what period of time? Within our first year, at least 0.75, 75%, I don't know why I did 0.75, of SART members. So that's how you're measuring your training objectives. We will conduct at least 2 case reviews in our first 6 months, short term, and 5 within the year, long term. So this is a way that you will hold yourself accountable to really being productive, which will help folks to start to keep coming back to the meetings because you're getting stuff done, you're doing meaningful work. These are things that you will revisit. So I encourage you to revisit this on a semi-annual basis, at the very minimum, an annual basis. So maybe your goal is to prevent sexual assault in your community or sexual violence in your community. So maybe your objectives are a school-based program long-term and a bartender training. So let's just do the objectives just for the school-based program. You're going to review 5 prevention curricula within the first quarter and select an option. Who's going to do that? Who's taking part? Where are you getting the curricula from? Make sure you talk about the minutiae and the details in it. We will work with K through 12 school personnel to discuss options for programming. We will pilot 1 class within the first year. Teach 3 sessions at a high school within the first year. And then your long-term goal, within 5 years, you're going to be at elementary, middle, and high school. If you're not able to accomplish all of these goals, that's life, right? That's reality. You might have to amend these as you go through. Who's at the table, what's going on with the schools, all of these things might change, but planning is helpful. By the way, if anyone's interested in bartender training, email me. It's happening here in Colorado. It's happening in other places. There are curricula out there for it. Always measure, because you need to, what do you need to know to keep yourselves accountable to yourself and your community to make sure that you're doing what you say you're going to do or hope to do? Who's going to be responsible for collecting this information? It might be as easy as like, hey, did we call that person? But somebody needs to be responsible for it, and it shouldn't just be one person. How often are you going to collect and analyze the data that you're doing to measure your project, your progress? And in all of this, you always need to be thinking, if you're ever collecting any information, are you de-identifying information? How are you maintaining confidentiality? When you're planning what you're going to do as a SART, some of the helpful things to include your community can be a community needs assessment. So I've got a presentation on this. It could be something that we do as a webinar at a future date about how to do a community needs assessment. It can be a lot of work depending on your experience and your capacity. Readiness assessment as well. So this could be focus groups, it could be phone calls, it could be an online survey. One of the things that can be helpful is if you have a college or a university that you can work with to help you to conduct these, to develop the material, to talk about best practice, to even just bounce ideas off of, get them involved. Okay, so what are the barriers to SART development and keeping SARTs going, keeping them productive, keeping people showing up, making it feel meaningful? What are the things that are getting in the way in your community? I have a whole list, so if anyone's struggling thinking about things that are challenging, we could go through mine. But my guess is that we all have enough barriers to addressing the challenging problem of sexual violence collaboratively. And my guess is we've already mentioned quite a few of them as well. Do we got anything yet, Maria?
Nope, not yet.
All right, so what I'm going to do is...
We're still thinking.
All right, you keep thinking. I'm going to start going through some of the ones that we have, and then I'll pause and see when we're going through them if we've gotten any. Having turnover rate, I might have mentioned that now about 8 times. It happens. So having high turnover rate can be a challenge because that person might have been a key person who's doing the work. And it might feel like, oh, we've done all of this and now it's fallen to the wayside. Having your SART coordinator turnover. I've heard that in multiple communities here. Oh yeah, we had a SART, but then our coordinator moved on or changed positions and now we don't. I think this is true for almost every single community I've spoken with, is just not having a lot of capacity. Everybody already has so much work on their plate. Burnout is a real thing. So to add this other meeting where you're asking people to develop goals, objectives, and benchmarks and actually commit to doing the work of those objectives, the tasks, hard. Also historical turmoil, whether that has to do with turf issues, butting heads somewhere, absolutely exists.
Somebody typed in that folks only want to do case review.
Okay, I've heard this a lot here. SART is so much more than case review, in my opinion, and the community is going to define what they're going to do. So I can't ever go to a community and say you have to do more than case review. But I do think that taking a really comprehensive look at how you're going to tackle the issue of sexual violence and how doing things other than case review can impact the work that all of us do is a great conversation. We talked about turf issues, lack of a coordinator. Oh my gosh, lack of money. I'm actually surprised to see how many people have funding here for their SART coordinators. Really happily surprised in comparison to where I come from. We're going to talk about funding in a minute, but these are real issues for SARTs to really overcome. Any others, Maria? Okay, so what is it that you can do? I asked for you all to do a survey, not you all, but folks who are on our SART listserv, to ask them, what are you doing? So in order, this is what folks are saying they're doing the most: case review, training, working on their SANE program, sharing resources, and developing or working on protocol. All of these are awesome activities, and I think that having a variety of them, it can be helpful to really be comprehensive. So within response, you can develop protocol. Protocol development is a process. What I see most folks do is they do the process of developing protocol, and then it kind of is a paper that doesn't do anything. It really is a long process that if you don't train on it within your agencies, I don't think it's going to be all that effective, except for the folks at the table, which isn't going to be widespread. You can also do case review, multiple types of cases you could do case review on. So you could do open and closed case review, benefits to both, downfalls to both. There's lots of webinars out there on case review, so I can send you a lot of those so you can learn more. I can also host one as well live. You can also do system case review, where you're just looking at system issues and not specific cases. And then you could do case presentation, where it's maybe not even a case from your community, but it's saying, this is what happened, here's how we handled it, here's how we overcame this and that. Awareness campaigns. Okay, so some rural communities say, we don't really know what to do because we don't have very many cases. So here's my question to those communities. Is sexual assault happening now? The answer is yes. They might not be accessing services, disclosing, reporting. It's happening. So how do we address the trauma, and how do we stop that from happening? We need to let people know what is sexual violence. We need to let them know their reporting options and what is available to them. I think that that can be happening in every single community, because when we look at who's accessing services, who's reporting, and whose cases are actually being prosecuted, our rates are pretty abysmal. And then training. Always, we can use more training, and we can train each other. That's the beauty of SART. You all have expertise on something, and you can train each other, and then reach out to other folks in your community as well, and reach out to CCASA. It's what we do. Oh, and become a member. It's important. Do outreach, so you could let people know, especially marginalized communities, what they could do to get your services, how they can access them. Do prevention in schools, do bystander intervention training and programs. Evaluate what are the existing resources, what policies, procedures, and protocols do we all have in our agencies, and does that align with what we actually believe in? Do a community needs assessment, look at statistics. What does the census data tell us about who lives within our geographic area, and then who is actually accessing support based on those demographics in our community? What are the discrepancies? Evaluate your response for consistency, collaboration, coordination. So you're going to need foundational data and then compare, like, okay, this is where we're at in January 2020. Where are we at in July 2020? Where are we at in July 2021? So when I asked about the effectiveness of your SART, I got 9 responses, as you can see. So, you know, this is for the folks who did respond. It's somewhat of a bell curve. But we could be doing better. But it's another meeting. There's already so much work to do, right? Why would we do all of these things that you're talking about? It feels so overwhelming. Well, there's a lot of benefits that you've already mentioned. Knowledge of resources, sharing that, building relationships, coordination. Reducing the unhealthy norms that allow sexual violence to exist, and creating healthier norms within your community. Increasing awareness, which then is going to help your jury pool, and it's going to help reduce secondary trauma. Building trust between SART members, and if you tell your community about your SART, within your community, which can help them to access services and will likely increase reporting. Okay. Also, another regularly scheduled meeting so that you can maybe enjoy some bagels and coffee, or if you're really lucky, donuts and coffee. Behold, teamwork, so many great things that can come of it. Collaboration, it can help all of us to do our jobs together better. All right, I have a couple other things. That is the end of like a lot of the content of this, but I want to give a shout out to Amanda, who might be with us today. If she is and she has anything to add, just let us know in the chat box. So she is doing SANE telemedicine around the support around the state. So what that means is if there are SANEs in your community who you think could use more support, she can video conference in and help them with their exams. So here's her contact information. You're going to get this PowerPoint so you can get it from there. Where do you get funding to do this? So VOCA, Stop VAWA, ICJR, rural grants, those are all grants that you can use towards SART coordination and SART work. Another thing that I was talking to a SART coordinator about, the way that she gets her funding is by pooling money from the members on the SART. Their agencies actually put forth money, which is awesome. Okay, so what can we provide? What is the CCASA here for? Well, we're here for this webinar and more. We can do different trainings. We have a limited capacity, but we're able to go out into the community to a certain extent to do in-person training. So that could be like strategic planning with you. It could be training on other topics as well, like trauma-informed. I was talking to someone yesterday and they asked for confidentiality agreement. I sent that to them. You don't have to go digging, I'll go digging for you, email me. So if you ever want to troubleshoot an issue that you're having within your community around how do we work on getting a SANE program here, call me. I'll talk you through it. I'll connect you to other people if I don't know what to do. And then I'll give you support. It's my job. I host monthly SART coordinator calls. So they are currently scheduled for the last Tuesday of every month at 2 p.m. This will be our first call that I am hosting, so I'm going to ask if this is the best time for everybody. If you want to be a part of these calls, email me. I also have a SART listserv. That's how I email about these calls. But if there's ever a great resource that's coming up, or a training, or a question that I have of you, or that you have that you want to troubleshoot with other folks, we can utilize our SART listserv for that. So email me and I can get you on that. So what is to come soon? We are going to have a request form for trainings. It's not up yet because we're trying to deal with some technical bugs. But for now, if you do want to request training, if you know your SART wants training or you want to go to them and say, hey, what training do we want? This is available. Email me and then we could talk about it. There are lots of resources that aren't me that are online. So if you're like, I don't want to talk to Jenna, that's fine, totally cool. Here are places that you can access lots of resources. The NSVRC SART toolkit is kind of overwhelming how much it is. They kind of walk you through all the different steps and things you could do in a SART, as well as give you concrete examples of protocol and confidentiality agreements and MOUs and so on. Minnesota Coalition, so they're a coalition just like we're a coalition, except they're not in the same state as us. They do a lot around SARTs. So they have a lot of resources, webinars that you can check out there. I think they're the ones who do this rural realities blog. So if you're a SART in a rural area, this is a cool blog you could follow. All right, so I am still trying to map out the whole state, and I've done a lot of phone calls, and some of you I've talked to, some of you I haven't because I didn't recognize who you are. So do you have a SART? If yes, do you know who coordinates it? If no, do you want to start one? Email me. So I'm trying to figure out who's doing what where. It'll help me to support everyone, including you. So shoot me an email, and I would love to chat with you. So what future topics for webinars are you interested in? Email me and let me know, and we'll figure that out. And hopefully your hills will be alive with the sound of teamwork. All right, so again, we will email you this PowerPoint, and Maria's going to post this webinar, so you get to hear my terrible jokes posted forever on our YouTube channel, so it will be up within 48 hours. And again, if you haven't seen my email address enough, there it is again. Does anyone have any questions?
Jenna, we don't have any that are coming in right now, nor that have come in the meantime. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with folks as we wrap up? I know we only have about 3 minutes left. So wanted to see if, while people are thinking about the questions that they might have, or any other comments, if there's anything else that you'd like to leave people with.
Yes. So what I would love is a request. Tell me how I can support you. Like 100% of my job is to support sexual assault response teams. Maybe not 100%. Agatha, my boss, is on here. She'll be like, no, you've other duties too. You need to go to the meetings. How can I best support you? What are some things that I can do that would be beneficial so that your sexual assault response and resources and prevention and your ways to address sexual violence in your community can be the best that it can? What is it that I can do? All right, any questions? I just covered everything, didn't I?
Yes. And so far, someone mentioned that they have no questions, and I wonder if that's the same, that they will email you with the information that you're seeking and with more direct TA type of stuff. With that, I know we just have a couple of minutes left, so as I'm talking, a question comes in, I'll go ahead and switch gears to that. But I just want to say thank you to Jenna for providing all of this wonderful information, for being with us here this afternoon. I want to thank you all for joining us, and for being here with us on this afternoon for an hour and a half learning about SARTs. I do want to remind you all about that email. I know Jenna already mentioned it, but I will be sending that follow-up email with a PDF copy of the slides. And if you have any other questions, Jenna's email address will be on there. You can email her, you can email me with any additional questions that you may have or that may come up. We're currently still determining what our next webinar will be for next month. Any ideas, again, in that survey of things that you want to hear that are coming up for you here in this early 2020, type that in there, share that with us so that I can try to find someone that will meet those needs that you have. So please, with that, remember to fill out the survey that will be in that follow-up email. Again, that really helps us out in making sure that we're doing the best we can to provide the assistance that you all need. So thank you all for attending the webinar again. Thank you, Jenna, and I think that is it for this afternoon. So keep an eye out for that follow-up email from me, and otherwise have a great afternoon. Bye.